Typically, I think the PhD journey is really a test of patience, and a good PhD students therefore has to be really having lot of patience. Okay, if you are like an impatient person, then you are unlikely to be a good PhD student. That is number one. So, like I mentioned that I was greatly influenced during my early research days, my advisor, Professor P.R.K. Rao and other faculty members. When I joined IIT Bombay as a faculty and I started working, I was also greatly influenced by some of the other faculty members in other institutes, people like Professor Ashok Jhunjhunwala, who has made, at that point of time, the mission to develop the technology indigenously and to make it beneficial to the larger population of the country. And since, my primary areas of interests are in communications and broadband communications and wireless, the obvious point was that how we can use these technological interventions to help, the larger populations, and how we can make a difference in terms of digital empowerment and enabling the internet or broadband connectivity. So with this broad picture in mind, then we started looking at why the technology which exists, which have been developed in the Western world, or which has come through the research by reading the papers of IEEE transactions, have not been able to, why those technologies, cannot address some of the challenges that are faced in the country. And so we started looking at those problems, and then we realized that some of the challenges and problems that are there are very unique and specific to India, and therefore they can be addressed only by Indian researchers, because, the researchers in other parts of the world, whether it is, Europe or US, they cannot even comprehend what are the problems that affect the country. And with that things in mind, then we did some lot of research in that areas, how we can take up the research problems that will solve the problems of providing affordable broadband connectivity. And as a result of those problems and the research, came out some of these concepts of frugal 5G, or providing the broadband connectivity to the rural areas. So those solutions then came out of the research that we did, which we were trying to see that how our research can be used to solve the problems of providing broadband connectivity in the country. So I think that was really the motivation. And since then, in fact, this research has been more recent on the frugal 5G, but I'm talking even, my early 90s. We have been looking at problems, whether it is wireless or, my earlier part of the research was mostly concerned with the wireline research, mostly, the internet, MPLS networks, or carrier Ethernet, that kind of research. Even during that research, we had seen that some of the problems are very unique to the country. There was always, in my entire 25 or 30 years of research careers, there is this underlying pinning that we have to develop the technology indigenously and make the country, technologically superior. That was also the motivation for me to start a company in 2002. That has also been the motivation to make impact in the standards, and that has also been a motivation to develop the technology for the rural broadband. So I think this underlying theme has been there, that we have to become technologically self-reliant. So first of all, these have been really very challenging times for everyone. So these have been challenging times for administrators, these have been challenging times for students, and these have been challenging times for faculty. Everyone, of course, thinks that he or she only is in these difficult times, the rest of the others are not, but it is not actually true. So last 1.5 years has been one of the most difficult time in terms of the administration. At any point of time, whether it is, this pandemic or otherwise also, you have to to take decisions which may not be to your liking at all the times, but you have to keep the larger interest of the institute and the stakeholders in mind. For example, and since you mentioned about vacating the hostels, I have been all through my life as a faculty member, and nothing can be more painful than asking my own students, to leave. So this is not just that as a director, but as a faculty member. But you actually evaluate all possibilities. I mean, you evaluate the possibilities that what will happen if the students remain in the hostels, what will happen if the students go home, and then you evaluate pros and cons, and then take a decision which you believe that will be in the best interest of everyone. Okay, so in the students, the institute, and the faculty. Now, that may not be liked by everyone, and you may also make a mistake. I mean, it is not that every time that the decision that you take may turn out to be a correct judgment, because in such positions you always take a judgment call. And the other thing is that in such situations, particularly during the pandemic situations, you have to also take decision fast. So you also need you cannot take lot of time for thinking, because such situations require the decisions to be taken quickly. The decisions may be difficult, may not be in best of your likings, but at that point you think that these serve the best interest. Now, it may turn out that those decisions sometime may prove to be wrong. If they indeed turn out to be proved to be wrong, I think for a good administrator it is always best to correct it whenever an opportunity for the correction arises. So that is how we have been working all through. So yes, I mean, how it has affected my research, yes, when I was a student, I was working mostly theoretical research. Today I have a few of my students who are working on theory, but a few of them really are working which they need the lab, because we are in fact working on this 5G test bed. The students really had to work on the test beds which has been set up in the lab. They have been able to log in remotely and do this, but that has all the limitations. So I know that in cases of some students the work has been affected, in case of some students it has not been. But in my particular case, I have been very cognizant of helping the students. So I have been really fortunate to have enough grants available all the time. So therefore, I have been able to support the students financially. I mean, but in terms of the research, yes, I mean, some of them had to take longer time than, perhaps if the things were normal, they could have finished maybe 6 months back. No, I think I am always of the belief that you must collaborate with the industry. And in fact, I have been collaborating with the industry right from the day one. And I have had projects both with the industry, and I have had projects both with the other research funding, government research funding organizations like Department of Science and Technology and Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. Most of the time, I have used the money from the Department of Science and Technology, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology to set up the infrastructure, to set up the equipments and other things. And all the industry money I have used to fund the manpower, like fund the research scholars when they run out of the scholarships. The other thing, I think industry collaboration is also important to understand the real life problems that the industry brings in. And the collaborations can also help you in translational research. As you mentioned about frugal 5G, rural broadband, the main focus of our research also in the last 5 years has been translational research, in the sense that we really want to see that the research that we are doing gets converted into prototypes, products, they get commercialized. And for that, it is very important that you actively work with the industry. I know that, in India, some of the Indian industry does not have in-house R&D ecosystem. Some of them may be working on very rudimentary problems, maybe looking for only some simple engineering solutions. But the scenario is changing slowly in various areas. At least in my areas of research now, there are many companies and industries in India which have an in-house very strong R&D. Some of the multinationals are also there in the country. And things are changing. But in some areas, I understand that may not be the case. But even there, I would encourage and say that faculty members must collaborate with the industry to sort of increase their capacity and capability. Maybe they don't have in-house R&D today. Maybe they are looking for some very simple engineering solutions. But it is really the responsibility of us academics to work with them and improve their R&D capability. So I really view the industry collaborations as extremely important in the engineering research. We have been working on the things that India should become self-reliant in the technology, and particularly in state-of-the-art technology. And in these cutting-edge state-of-the-art technology, since IITs have really taken the lead, as IIT, Indian Institute of Science, TIFR, such institutions have taken the lead in doing cutting-edge research technology. There is now a need to do the translational research, convert these research ideas into prototypes, products, commercialize, and become globally competitive. And in that chain, the entrepreneurial ecosystems that has been set up in most institutions now, whether they are IITs or other institutions. Particularly, I would encourage the PhD students who are really working on the high-end research. If they can convert their research ideas into prototypes and translational research, and then later on incubate and commercialize these, this will not only enable us to develop the indigenous technology, but also create a whole ecosystem which creates jobs, more and more enterprises. It creates more and more jobs. It creates high-end technology. And overall, then, it contributes to the economic growth of the country. And that is where, if you really see that IITs, when they were set up in late 50s or something, they were really set up with this intention that they will become a hub of this technology development and entrepreneurial ecosystem. Unfortunately, the first 25 years or 30 years of the IIT that were spent mostly on the undergraduate teachings and all. But as I said, last 15, 20 years that have changed. And now increasingly we are seeing IITs to become a hub of technology development and entrepreneurial ecosystem. And not only the IITs, but other institutions are also getting inspired. And you see now these activities taking place in NITs or in other IITs and or in other engineering colleges. And as I already said, that there is no dearth of talent in a country like India. In fact, our biggest assets is the human manpower, our own populations. If we are a country of 130 billion plus populations, that is our biggest weakness. But we should also realize that that is our biggest strength as well, because we have this large horsepower of the talented young people. And if we can catalyze this talent into developing entrepreneurial ecosystem rooted in the high-end technology, then we have really an opportunity to become, in the real sense, a technology and economic power. I would say we are still not ready for that. I will just give you an example of, when we formed this Telecom Standards Development Organization, TSDSI, along with my colleague Bhaskar Ramurthy and Ashok Jhunjhunwala from IIT Madras and several other colleagues. See, there was this issue that when you are solving the problems of the country, like Frugal 5G, you said, or others, technology, whether you want to make India-specific standards. Okay. So, there we have always said that we don't want to make India-specific standards, because if you do this, then what will happen is that you will not take advantage of the economies of scale that comes from global standards. So what should be our objective? Our objective is that we create intellectual property rights, IPRs, we create patents, we create technology, and we take these IPRs, patents, and technology to global standards and make them as a part of the global standard, so that, there is an overall impact, not only to solve the country's problems, but also globally. In the same way, when you are doing some fundamental research or basic research and you have published a paper, We should really make an attempt that more and more research gets done and more research gets published in the high quality impact journals globally. And finally, we should get control of those journals, in the sense, if you look at, for example, in electrical engineering, most of the, let's say, IEEE journals and all, most of the editors and most of the editor-in-chiefs and all, they are mostly right now coming from the Western world. We would slowly, you can see now people coming from China and South Korea also, and a few Indians. We should really see a scenario where most of the editorial boards is coming from faculty members and academicians and scientists from India. And most of the papers which are of like high quality are coming from India. So we should really see a scenario where we do a high-end research which really makes a global impact and gets a global recognition. Okay, when we reach a scenario, then, and if we are really doing so much research, then we can think of that maybe we should have like an Indian journal. We should not have, because in order to have like an Indian journal, you need a critical mass also. You need a critical mass of researchers. You need critical mass of academicians. You also need a critical mass of editorial staff and the associated staff, and you need a critical mass who will use that journal, who will read their journal. You don't want this journal to only write only journals. Only those who have written, only they are reading. So we need to reach that scenario. I would say that we have not yet reached that. Okay, so what is the need? There is a need to really expand in this research mass. We need more researchers. We need more high quality researchers. We need more academics. And that, in that sense, we really need to inculcate the spirit of research in other institutions, like in other engineering colleges, in other universities. We really need to improve the standards of research in these institutions. We really need to improve the quantity of research in IITs, which are already now doing very good quality research, but then we need to increase the quantity. Okay, so once we reach a critical mass, then we can sort of think of having Indian journals which are making a global impact. I think that is important in the sense that you have to not only do the high quality research and develop technology, but you also need to let others know what you have done. And in that sense, existing social media or whatever, other forms of the media play an important role. These not only, of course, give visibility to the general public, but more importantly, I think this also serves as a mechanism for getting feedback from the general public. General public who are not technologists, they will actually give a very naive general comment, and that actually you can really use it to think about it. That what could be the next research challenges that are important from solving the people's problem. Okay, so these are these two purposes, and of course you have to give visibility to the general public. If you have done some translational research, if you have done some technology development that is going to affect the quality of life in general for others, then I think it is very important that you should let others know what you are doing. Mostly what happens is the scientific research and the technology research communication gets confined to the experts, researchers. They only write and they only read. So it's a closed community. But it is also very important that how do we take a complex research discovery or a complex technology development, write it in a simplified way and make it accessible to the public at large. So that aspect is also actually very, very important. See, most of my students have worked independently. I have given that independence. We have defined a general problem and an area, and I have really permitted the students to explore in that independently. And that was because that was the training that I got during my PhD days. Typically, I think the PhD journey is really a test of patience, and a good PhD students therefore has to be really having lot of patience. Okay, if you are like an impatient person, then you are unlikely to be a good PhD student. That is number one. Number two is that, of course, you need to be completely dedicated and committed, and you need to be enjoying the research that you are doing. If you don't enjoy the work that you are doing, then it will be really very difficult to be fully committed to doing that. And then obviously, it will affect the output. So I would say that you really need to have a patience. You really need to be enjoying the work that you are doing. In a PhD research, there will always be like ups and downs. There will be some moments of, there will be some eureka moments that, where you feel really very happy. There will be moments where months of work has not led to any output. But that is where you having a lot of patience will help. And another important thing I think a PhD student needs to keep in mind that this is not really the end game. You are not in the end game. You are in the beginning game, and therefore you really don't need to get disheartened if you are not getting results quickly, or if your papers are getting rejected, or if the papers were not accepted, things like this. So you need to keep your morale very high. In that sense, I would say that this is where I think the role of a supervisor comes into the picture. It is my belief that every individual has their own strengths and weaknesses. Some students are good in some areas, some students are good in other areas. The job of a supervisor, and that's what actually I have done, has actually recognized that what is the strength of that student and has given him or her that kind of a problem. I know in my group, some students have been very, very good, theoretically are outstanding, have a great grip over the fundamentals of stochastic optimizations or mathematics. So they have worked on those kinds of problems. And I knew very well that some students cannot handle these problems, but are good in some other aspects. And they have really flourished in this. That is where the role of the supervisor comes, that to advise the students that this is what your strengths are, and this is where you can really flourish, because every individual has their own strength and has their own weaknesses. So you have to really take out the strength of that individual and steer the student in that direction, so that her strength gets amplified. So that's how one has to do. So I think if I have to say in one sentence, then I should say that every individual has their strengths and weaknesses. Just look inside and find out what is your strength, and just harness that, and don't spend too much time on taking your weakness and making and then discussing how to remove your weakness. You cannot remove that. An individual has some weaknesses, they will remain. Just get your strength and start working on enhancing your strength and building on it.